So this might be a sort of weird time to make this video because I literally just got this A7 IV, but this video is going to be about my dream camera, I guess. If I could design a camera, if I knew how to design a camera, this is what this video is about. Now, I will preface this by saying clearly, I do not know how to make cameras. I don't know what it would take, and there would probably be plenty of things that I would say that maybe aren't possible with the current technology we have. But I'm going to say it anyway, just because it would be nice. And a lot of the things that I am going to mention are probably unnecessary, especially for someone that just does this, just making YouTube videos and like other videos for social media. I don't need a lot of these features, but they are cool features that would be helpful. So basically I'm just saying, if I could design a camera, this is what I would want in it. To put it bluntly, I guess, it would be a Sony FX4. So it's the FX3, but better. Basically, there's just some more features that I wish they would add to just make that camera better in a few ways. And I'm going to split it up into 3 sections. There's going to be hardware, software features, and general like capabilities when it comes to particularly video performance, because the way I'm thinking about it, at least, it's not going to be a hybrid camera like the A7 IV. It's going to be a video, I guess, cinema style camera. Now, with the new cameras releasing at the moment, like the Canon R6 Mark II just released, the FX30 from Sony just released, the A7 R5 just came out, and I'm expecting the A7S IV might be next year. So a lot of these features may show up in that camera, or if they update the FX3 to make maybe an FX4 or something along those lines. A lot of these features might be in it. I would hope a lot of these features would be in it, but who knows? This is basically just a wish list, I guess. Okay, starting with hardware. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about, of course, is the sensor. Full frame, of course, and I would say 6K. And the reason that I say that I would like a 6K output is so I can do cropping like this, and we can crop in and out to have 2 different shots with the same shot without losing any resolution. Because if I am in 4K right now, which I'm recording in 4K on both cameras, if I crop at all on either of them, I'm no longer going to be in an actual native 4K. So with 8K, it would be good, so then you can zoom in 4 times and it would still be 4K. 8K is maybe a little excessive, and it would be harder to work with on most computers because the files are going to be so much bigger and just harder to work with in general. But there are proxies and stuff like that, so you can get around that. But I think 6K is, and has been in the past, a pretty good happy medium between 4K and 8K. So you can have a higher resolution than 4K to allow for punch-ins and general like oversampling sort of stuff without having to go all the way to 8K. So 6K 30 minimum, potentially 6K 60. For me, it'd be 25 and 50, but same sort of thing. So that's the sensor. When it comes to the body itself, I would like to see, and I hope they do this in like all of their new cameras, but the Sony A7R5 flip screen, the 4-axis tilt and flip screen, they need to do that in all their cameras. Every single camera in the like alpha line sort of thing, this like the mirrorless lineup, needs to have that screen on it. If you haven't seen it, go watch a review, any review of the A7R5, and it's like the first thing that everybody mentions because it's like the best thing about that camera. Regarding I/O, it would definitely need to have full-size HDMI, as most modern Sonys do now. USB-C, of course, mic and headphone in, potentially even a line in as well, so you can plug in an audio recorder directly without having to worry about line level and mic level signals mixing. So if you have a mic in and a line in, that could be nice. As well as potentially an XLR input. Although if you're trying to keep the form factor similar size to these sorts of cameras without getting up to like a Canon C70 sort of bigger cinema, like small cinema camera, it would either have to be an audio handle like the FX3 and FX30, where you just have basically external inputs for audio. So I would be okay with that if it basically just came with an audio handle like the FX3 does. But potentially if there was room, if it didn't make the body too big, it would be nice to have maybe a built-in XLR input, so then you can run an XLR mic on top of your camera. I don't know how easy that would be to do, but maybe it would probably be better just to have an audio handle. So then you can have the option of, if you want XLR, yeah, it's going to be a bit bigger. Otherwise, you can just use a regular on-camera shotgun mic like I have here. One thing that would also be very nice, which is a feature of the FX3 and FX30, is tally lights on the front, back, and top of the camera. So the record button lights up, there's a tally light on the front that will light up when you're recording, and on the back as well, so no matter where you're looking at the camera from, you can see whether or not it's recording. Now, the next two might clash. One thing that I think would be really good, and something that they do in the Canon C70, the Sony FX6, is internal ND filters. So they have an electronic ND filter, and an ND filter is, said in the camera basics video, is basically like sunglasses for your lens. Generally, you would like screw a circular filter onto the end of your lens, but then you need to, like, maybe if you only have one filter, you'd have to change between different lenses if you want to change lenses, but having it built into the camera would just solve all of that. And it's electronic, so there's no issues with turning anything. You don't have to physically do anything. You just press a button and it would change. Or you could potentially even set it on auto. I'm pretty sure those cameras have an auto setting where the ND can change automatically with exposure. So that would be something that would be very nice, and then you don't have to buy ND filters and deal with having to use them all the time. But then the next thing is IBIS, which is in-body image stabilization. The A7 IV has it. The Lumix actually has it. Panasonic is apparently very well known for their IBIS. They have good image stabilization. I think largely it's because in a lot of their cameras they have micro four thirds sensors, and the smaller sensor is easier to stabilize than a larger sensor, and that makes sense. But if you have NDs going in front of the sensor, I don't think you can stabilize it with our current level of technology, basically. If someone can figure out a way to have internal ND filters and IBIS, do it. That would be the goal, I guess. And I'm not sure which one I would prefer to have, because I know the FX6 has built-in ND filters, but it doesn't have IBIS. So any stabilization, you would be relying on either stabilizing it with a gimbal or some sort of rig, or the optical stabilization in lenses, which not all lenses have. Like even a lot of the G Master lenses, I don't think have stabilization. My 20mm 1.8 does not have stabilization, so I rely entirely on the in-body stabilization or stabilization in post if you're going to do that while editing. So those two, I'm not quite sure which one I would prefer, especially since I haven't actually used ND filters before. Now, moving on to software features. Now, there's not much. The menus, I would like them to be, pretty. I like the Sony menu. Apparently, a few years ago, the Sony menus were not great, but in the last few cameras, they did a big update, and the menus are now quite good. Apparently, the cinema cameras like the FX3, the FX30 have new cinema-style menus as well, which are apparently pretty good. People like them, so maybe they would include that, especially if it's going to be, an FX4 cinema line camera. So having good menus, and then the other big software, which I guess is kind of hardware as well because it does require the AI chip, is the autofocusing system in the A7R5. Now, that new autofocus system using AI to track people and to basically predict where it should focus if it can't see a face. It can detect a body and decide where to focus based on where the eye would be, or the head or the back or whatever. It can detect things just way better, and apparently the focusing system is very good. So that would be something that this camera would need to have. I'm very happy with the A7 IV autofocus, especially coming from Panasonic, which does not have good autofocus. I use it in manual focus most of the time, especially in 4K, which I talked about in my review of the camera up here. And when it comes to capabilities, I would say 6K 30, like I mentioned before, and 6K 60 full frame, if possible. Although that's not as big of a deal. 4K 60 uncropped would be ideal. It would also be good if we can do 4K 120 with no crop. If I'm remembering correctly, the A7S III and the FX3 can do 4K 120 with like a 1.1 times crop, I think. So uncropped 4K 120 would be good. However, with a higher resolution sensor, I could imagine that it might be necessary to have a crop in 4K 120. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's sort of a necessity to have that crop. And then, sort of in line with how the FX3 and the A7S III can do 240 FPS in 1080, that's fine. I don't think anyone really needs more than that for the most part, unless you're doing like proper slow motion. And then one other thing that I don't think any Sonys have, but I'm pretty sure Panasonic can do, is open gate, meaning you can record using the full sensor or change your aspect ratios. Now, that is something that would be very nice, especially in this day and age with a lot of vertical video is being able to shoot not in 16:9. Shooting in 16:9 is fine, but a lot of the time, a lot of people crop their footage anyway. A lot of the time this way, so it'll be like maybe a 2:1 or something along those lines. Being able to record the full sensor, or if you really want like just a specific part of the sensor, but the entire sensor, if it's a 3x2 or 4x3 sensor, that would be good, because then you would have more vertical resolution to work with, and you don't have to crop in on your 4K whatever it is, and then have to deal with trying to frame that as well as you need to make that work. And just being able to shoot on the entire frame and then just have a larger total resolution would be a little bit harder to work with in post, but easier to work with in post in other ways, because you can actually do what you want with it regarding cropping. Depending on what aspect ratio the sensor is, if it's a 3x2, you want to be able to shoot in at least 3x2, 16:9, and probably 2:1, because that's a pretty common crop for that. Although you maybe wouldn't want to shoot in 2:1, you would want to shoot in 16:9 or 3x2 and then crop in post, so then you don't lose that resolution before you even get to editing. So I'd say at least being able to utilize the full sensor when recording. And then one big thing that I've actually noticed, switching between frame rates on this camera, because I can easily switch between frame rates on this camera, a little bit on this one, but I don't do it as much. But having shutter angle would be so nice. It's so annoying forgetting to change your shutter speed when you change frame rate. And if you didn't know, shutter angle is based on how cameras used to work back in the day, where the shutter would be open for half of each frame. So a shutter angle of 180 degrees is pretty standard. So they always recommend, if you're shooting in 30 FPS, to have your shutter speed at 1/60. So right now I'm shooting in 25, so I'm shooting in 1/50. But then if I was to change to 100 FPS, I would want to be shooting 1/200. And then if you do that, but then you forget to change your shutter speed, then the motion blur is not going to look right, and a lot of people won't notice, but that's just sort of the idea. And one other thing is, if you're in manual mode or shutter priority, which I would imagine most people are shooting video in most likely manual or potentially shutter priority, you can accidentally change your shutter speed. I've so many times on my G85, I've bumped the dial and accidentally changed my shutter speed by a stop. And it just is annoying. You'd be like, oh, I was accidentally one click off what I should have been. Now, it's not as big of an issue on the A7 IV, just because the dial is a bit stiffer, so it takes a little bit more to do it, and it's not right at the edge, so it's harder to accidentally do it. But still, you can do it. So it would be nice if you could just set it, shutter angle, 180 degrees, and then just leave it. You never have to touch it ever. When you change frame rate, it stays at 180. It does what it needs to do. I feel like that's it shouldn't be a hard thing to implement, so I don't know why the FX3 and the FX30 don't have that. They're cinema cameras. They should just have shutter angle, or have it as an option. I'm pretty sure the Blackmagic pocket cinema cameras could switch between shutter speed or shutter angle. So I don't understand why they don't have it. So shutter angle is one. And the last thing that I would like to see is an APS-C mode, or some sort of crop mode where you can crop in, so you can, if you're using a prime lens, have two different angles basically on the same lens while still maintaining the full resolution of your 4K. Now, I would imagine if the sensor isn't that much bigger than 6K, then you're not going to be able to do it with 6K. But in 4K, you'd be able to do it pretty easily. It might even be necessary for maybe the 4K high frame rate or something like that. Or if you don't know, maybe if they do like 6K 60 or 6K 120, maybe they do like a 1:1 readout for that. I don't know how it would work, but being able to crop in camera without losing any quality in video. In photo, you actually do lose quality because you're losing megapixels. But in video, if you're in 4K and you're being oversampled anyway, being able to crop in to a 1:1 readout would be pretty nice. And then that's something that I don't know if cameras really do at the moment, but being able to crop to a direct 1:1 readout for whatever resolution you have. So then you can zoom way in on a sensor. Say you're only shooting in 1080 and you don't have the lens to zoom in as much as you want, go to a 1:1 readout of 1080 and just use like the tiny middle bit of the sensor. You're still at 1080p, so you're still at the full resolution that you need to be at, but maybe you're at a 2.5, 3 times crop. I don't know what it would work out to be, but something like that could be potentially a useful feature, particularly with 4K, but then also 1080p, if you want to just zoom in way closer than you need to. If you need to turn your 20mm lens into a 50 and you're okay with shooting at a lower resolution, why not? That being said, you could also just do that in post by like shooting at a higher resolution and cropping in, but being able to just have it in camera would be nice as well. Basically how the APS-C mode in the A7 IV and the A1 and the A7R5 is implemented. So that's my wish list for this hypothetical camera. If you have anything else that you think would be good to add to such a camera, let me know in the comments. Or if you think that Sony or any other company will or will not make such a camera, like the video if you enjoyed listening to my little rant. Subscribe if you haven't already. I make videos about cameras and audio, and I stream as well, so come hang out in those. And I'll see you next week. Okay, bye. Bloopers. This camera, and that camera, and that camera. I don't know where to look. There's so many screens, and so many cameras. And this pimple on my chin, super annoying, because it's like it's facing that camera, which kind of sucks. Camera 1. And we're still recording everything.